Hey everybody, welcome to St. Stephen's Online. We hope you enjoy catching up on our talk from Sunday.
Well, I didn't know how many people were going to be here this morning. I have to say, in mid-August, you're never quite sure what's the turnout going to be. Because I know, I guess some of you've been on holiday, like I have. Maybe some of you are about to go on holiday. Maybe some of you decided to stay put for August. But I want you to travel with me this morning a distance of about 2,500 miles to the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, because that is the location of the Sermon on the Mount from the words that we've just been reading together were spoken. And our theme this morning is Astonished by Generosity. Astonished by Generosity. You and I, as believers, are called to be generous people. Generous with our skills, with our talents, with our time, with our material resources, and with our money, specifically with our money. And it's interesting, as I prepare for any kind of talk, I often find out things that I didn't know before. Like, for example, in the Bible, there are just under 2,500 verses concerning money, the subject of money. That's almost, in fact, I'm told, twice as many verses than there are about faith and prayer combined. Jesus had a lot to say about money. Nearly 15% of everything that he said in total was related to money and possessions. 16 out of the 38 parables dealt with the topic of money. The only subject that Jesus taught about more than money was the kingdom of God, the kingdom of God. Now, why then is there this focus on money and material things? Because I think it's because the scriptures are very clear that there is an inherent connection between a person's spiritual life, your daily walk with the Lord, your attitudes, and therefore your actions concerning money and possessions. Now, I've been a Christian for just over 40 years now, and one of the great things to me about the Christian message is that at its heart, fundamentally, it is a message about change. Change for the better, change in your life, change in my life. And God offers you, and he offers me, the good news that not only the mistakes of the past are forgiven and forgotten, but also that he is actually working in us now, working in us right now to change us to be people that we are currently not. And that actually in this life, here and now, we are being conformed to the image of Christ. And so to come to Jesus, for me and for many others, maybe this is your story, is an opening up of a whole new universe of experience, a new lifestyle, new actions. We begin to act instead of react. And that's why the Sermon on the Mount will always be relevant, whichever age you're in, whichever time you read it. It will always be relevant because it's about change for the better. And Jesus' most influential and revered biographers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, collect this teaching together in the Sermon on the Mount. It is, in many ways, the manifesto of the kingdom of God. I have to say, though, that if you were to compare the Sermon on the Mount to a curry, it would be a chicken jalfrezi. It would not be a chicken korma. Okay, there are parts of it that are uncomfortable. Even this morning, spoiler alert, it's going to be a bit uncomfortable, I'm afraid. But let's dive in and look at these verses together. So we begin. Chapter 6, verse 1. Be careful, Jesus says. Be careful of what? Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others. Now, the word that we translate as righteousness is a slippery word. It's a Greek word called dikaiosune, and I have to tell you that a lot of ink has been spilled over this word and how to translate it. But most scholars agree here that righteousness is to do with right relationships with God, first and foremost, also right relationships with other people, so your colleagues at work, your family, your friends. But also there is this third category that Jesus refers to here, and he calls them the needy. And those people are those that are on the margins of society. And in fact, for that reason, a number of scholars translate the word righteousness as good works. So we read, "Be careful not to practice all of your good works in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Okay, so what is Jesus saying to us here? Well, I always find a good question to ask is, what is he not saying? So he's not saying, for example, don't do good works. Because a line later in verse 2, he says, when you give to the needy, not if. Jesus just assumes that his followers will go out and do good works, that it will be part of our lifestyle. Good works are a byproduct of a relationship with Jesus. Secondly, he's not saying, if you do good works, hide them. Hide them. A lot of people read, "Be careful not to do your good works in front of others," and they stop right there, and they cut out the end of the sentence, which is what? In order to be seen by them. Now, let me just pause for a moment and say this. We've been doing this series over the summer on the Sermon on the Mount. But this part that we're looking at this morning is one part of a much larger sermon. And so we break it up week by week. But imagine for a moment with me that you are hearing this in just one sitting. Just one sitting. Now, if you do that, just rewind back one page or a few minutes in the talk and remember what Jesus said earlier. Let your light shine before others that they may see your what? Your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That's what he said just a few lines earlier. And the key line actually from that verse is glorify your Father, not glorify you. And for me, in preparing for this, that is the litmus test. Does that good work glorify God, or does it just glorify me? Jesus is saying here that when you do good works, don't do them to show off. And the key line of chapter 6, verse 1 is this: to be seen by them, to be seen by them. And it's interesting, because actually in the Greek, it's this wonderful little word called theathanai. Theathanai. And it's actually where we get the word theatre from. So Jesus is saying here, look, don't make a theatre out of it. Don't make a production out of it. Don't make a West End show out of it, to be honoured by others. He's saying here, look, go ahead, do your good works, and incidentally, don't worry if they're in front of others, but just don't do them to be seen by them. Jesus just assumes here that you and I will give in our lives. So what he's dealing with here at a deeper level is our motivation. Our motivation. Let's move on to verse 2 then. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honoured by others. Now, I've done a little bit of research into first century history, and as far as I know, they did not play the trumpet when it came time for the collection, when it was time to give the money. But there is actually a little clever play on words going on here. So this is 2 millennia ago. This is before PayPal and contactless and direct debits and standing orders. But there was a giving box at the back of each synagogue that was actually made out of a ram's horn. And it was very similar to a shofar. I think we might have a shofar. There is a shofar, which was used as a trumpet. And so when you entered the synagogue, you would throw your shekel or your denarii or whatever it was, and it made a loud noise as it hit the edge of the ram's horn and was probably amplified due to the kind of the shape of the horn. And so you would walk in and you would announce yourself. And I'm guessing that the wealthier you were, the louder and perhaps the longer the announcement was as you dropped your coins in one after the other. Jesus is dealing here with our motivation. Now, that doesn't mean to say that he's not interested in our behavior. He's very, very interested in that too. Jesus is very interested in yours and in my behavior, and he wants to modify it a lot. But right behavior isn't enough. We need kind of the right heart posture and the right motivation behind it. Why am I doing this good thing? What is the motivation behind it? And Jesus here, in these verses, he's warning his followers about the danger of religious hypocrisy. Do not announce it, he says, as the hypocrites do in verse 2. Incidentally, the word hypocrite in Jesus' day, it didn't have the same negative connotation that it has today. It wasn't a pejorative word or a word of contempt. The word hypocrite in Jesus' day simply meant actor. And Jesus uses this word 17 times in the Gospels, and on each occasion he uses it to refer to religious leaders. And he's just saying here, look, these religious leaders in front of you here, they are actors in a theatre, and you're the audience. They're actors, they're not the real deal. Now, incidentally, notice here that Jesus was not afraid to call out religious hypocrisy. Years before the likes of, in our day, Richard Dawkins or the Daily Telegraph or Discovery Plus, Jesus was the trailblazer for this. And he is exposing these religious leaders, and in so doing, he is highlighting the danger of you and I getting sucked into good works, like giving to the needy, investing in the kingdom, even prayer and fasting he talks about, in order to look good, in order to put on an act in front of other people. And so the question that I have to ask myself, and we have to ask ourselves, and when it comes to giving, let's face it, we are a mixed bag of motivation, I would say, a mixed bags of motivation. But why am I doing this thing? What is my motivation? That's what Jesus is dealing here in chapter 6. So let's move on to verses 3 and 4. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Now, I could say an awful lot about those two verses alone. I'm not going to. I'm going to let a theologian called Dallas Willard give his analysis, because it is absolutely masterful. He writes this: the kind of people who have been so transformed by their daily walk with God that good deeds naturally flow from their character are precisely the kind of people whose left hand would not notice what their right hand is doing, like driving a car or speaking one's native language. What they do naturally, often automatically, simply because of what they are, pervasively and internally. These are people who do not have to invest a lot of reflection on doing good for others. Their deeds are in secret, no matter who is watching, for they are absorbed in love of God and of those around them. They hardly notice their own deeds and rarely remember them. You and I are called to a lifestyle of giving. Live to give. That's it in a nutshell. So motivation is absolutely key. It is fundamental. So then how then are we to do that in a way that glorifies God? How do we get our motivation right? Well, Jesus expands on this further in the second part of our reading this morning, verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. You know, one of the things that you and I need to realize is that we all have treasure. We all have treasure. We have things that we treasure. And those things really tell a lot about the kind of person that you are, what your identity is, what your hope is, what your goals are in life. And so you need to realize that there are things, and they're out there, and they're not necessarily God. And literally in the Greek here, he's saying, do not treasure treasures on earth. That is to say, when it comes to earthly things, Jesus is saying, don't treasure them. Why? Well, he tells us, because the moths and the vermin destroy, and the thieves break in and steal. Now, one of the reasons he's actually referring to moths here is that back then, your assets were not bank accounts or currency. Your assets were primarily physical things. For example, clothing was an asset. Now, you and I know that moths and clothing are not a good combination. And when you had a garment back in those days, you had it for life. It wasn't like you went to Zara or Massimo Dutti or Crew Company and insert the clothing company of your choice at this particular point, and you bought something for summer and then something for winter and then went back again the following summer and bought something else. Once you became an adult, your adult clothing was basically for life, and you passed it on. Clothing was far, far more expensive than it is now. It was a valuable asset. So what Jesus is actually saying here at a deeper level is that if your treasures are earthly things, then you're always going to be worried. You're always going to be insecure. You're always going to be fragile. Why? Because of the moths, because of the vermin, because of the thieves. I'm a great fan of the actor Denzel Washington, but not so much for his acting skills, but for his public speaking skills. If you search him on YouTube, he gets invited to all these colleges and universities, and he gives the most insightful analysis to young adults. Recently at a university, he said this: if you worship money and things, if they are where you attach real meaning in life, you will never have enough. You will never feel you have enough. For example, worship your body and beauty and sexuality, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die 1,000,000 deaths before they finally grieve you. Worship power, and you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need even more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. Jesus is saying here, if you treasure being smart, you will always feel stupid. If you treasure looking good, you will always feel ugly. If you treasure literal treasures, you will always feel poor. And if that's your security, then you will always feel secure. And therefore, when the ups and downs of life come, and they do, the anxiety, the fears, the anger, it will come because you're treasuring those earthly things. And the challenge for you and I is to see which things we've done that to, or which things we've done that with. What are those treasures? Where have we misappropriated our affection? What treasures have we treasured? And that's the first step, to take that kind of internal spiritual audit and look at our life and analyze where we've done that too. The second step we need to take is this. We need to relocate our treasure. Relocate your treasure. Jesus tells us what to do here, in fact. He says, but rather store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. What he's saying is go and get a source of meaning and self-worth and security and hope that is not subject to circumstances, that no thief can steal, that no person on earth can stop, that is not subject to change and decay. Then you will be totally secure. Well, you say, well, how do I do that, Peter? How am I going to do that this morning? What does it mean specifically to get treasure in heaven? Well, let me turn to a couple of the New Testament writers. Paul in Colossians 2:3, for example, he says this: Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. The Apostle Peter gives us a clue also, 1 Peter 2, verse 7, where he says this: now to you who believe, he is precious. Actually, he uses the noun form there. Peter actually says, to you who believe, he is preciousness. He is the ultimate treasure. Jesus is the ultimate treasure. So how do we begin to treasure Jesus in our lives? Well, I have to be quite honest with you. Believing in him alone is just not enough. It's not enough. You can believe very, very firmly in Jesus, but your heart can be elsewhere in a completely different place, in other treasures. Jesus says it here in verse 24, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other." The two, according to Jesus, are mutually exclusive. If you want to stop treasuring and loving one thing, you can't just believe in Jesus. You have to love him. You have to be in love with him. You have to be amazed by him, to be dazzled by him, to be astonished by him, to be overwhelmed by him. So here is what I believe Jesus is really saying here. He's really saying this: look, unless you've got me in your life, you're not really rich, because I'm the only currency that can never be devalued. And unless you've got me in your life, you'll never be successful, because I'm the only status. My love is the one success and the one status that you can never, ever lose. And so he's saying here, relocate your treasure. Treasure me. He's saying, treasure me. I've been a Christian, as I said, for over 40 years, and I've learned, as I said, that just believing in Jesus is not enough. You've got to treasure him. And I think, if you are a believer here this morning, deep down in your heart, you know that. You know that's true, that treasuring him will sustain you. You've got to treasure Christ. Then you will be safe from the moths, from the vermin, and from the thieves. How do you do that? Well, it's actually quite simple. We go back to the gospel message and we ask that question: why did he come? Why did he come down to earth? I mean, think about it for a moment. He had all that treasure. He had all that status. He had all that security. He had all that honor and privilege and wealth. He was in heaven. He had all of those treasures. Then why did he come to earth? There must have been something that he treasured so much that it was worth leaving behind everything in heaven to come down. There must have been something that he didn't have in heaven that was so important to him. He treasured it so much that he was willing to leave it for those other things behind to come here. Because he did leave it all behind, didn't he? He left it all behind. Why? For us. For you, for me. We are his treasure. And when you see Jesus treasuring you, when you see Jesus making you his treasure, that, I believe, will make him your treasure. And then you'll be free when you think about it. That's the natural consequence of that. When you see him as your treasure, you'll be free. And money just becomes money. And material things become just that, material things. Relocate your treasure. As I close this morning, I just want to give one further insight, which I hope will just bring this home to you this morning. The Bible in the Old Testament talks about the high priest. And the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies in the temple. They would go in once a year. And they would wear a number of kind of rather odd garments. We don't know too much about all of them, but one of them they would wear was an ephod. And an ephod was like a breastplate with precious stones dotted on it. And the stones were inscribed with the names of the tribes of Israel. Now, fast forward with me to the New Testament, and it's clear that all the New Testament writers are adamant in saying that Jesus Christ is now the actual high priest who is continually before the Father interceding and praying for us. Therefore, I believe it's not too much to draw out from this, that what you and I need to know this morning is that when you become a Christian, your name is inscribed over the heart of Jesus Christ, and he is bearing that before the Father, so that when the Father sees you, he sees an absolute treasure, an absolute beauty. And here, I believe, is what it really means to be a Christian believer. It's to be melded with that spiritual understanding that that is what God sees when he sees you and when he sees me. The only eyes whose opinion matters in the whole universe finds you more precious than all the jewels that lie beneath the earth. And the degree to which you understand that and accept that and absorb that into your life, the degree to which you're living out of that reality, that your name is written in heaven in the Lamb's Book of Life, that there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, that whom the Son sets free is free indeed. The degree which you're living out of that knowledge, I tell you, that knowledge, it will transform you. It will absolutely transform you. It will transform your whole life. It will transform your behavior. It will transform your relationships. It will transform the giving of your time, your money, your abilities, and your resources. Relocate your treasure. Maybe this morning you've misappropriated your affection, and it's time just to bring that focus back on to Jesus. And my prayer for each one of us today is that we would indeed make him our treasure. Elsewhere he's called kind of the pearl of great price. You are his most prized possession. Is he your most prized possession this morning?
Thanks for listening. We hope you found that encouraging. Have a great week and see you soon.